Hi, everyone. It's Brenda back again with another episode of Three Uniques. Today I have on Alison Tedford. Hi, Alison. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great having you here. So, Allison and I have worked together on a couple of things. She's been a consultant for me in my business, and she's also been a guest mentor inside Aligned AF, my 12-month coaching experience. And Allison is a diversity, equity, inclusion, and communication specialist. So, she works a lot with small businesses around reconciliation, understanding diversity or inclusive strategies that could be put into their business. Allison, what else can you tell folks about what you do?
Another thing that I do is I write for publications and brands, and I also write some books. So that has been something that I really enjoy doing. It's sharing stories with the world.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about sort of writing publications for organizations, even for small businesses like myself, Allison had an opportunity to look at my website, look at some of the copy, and give me some feedback and assessment around how I could really just make sure the language that I wanted to convey to my audience, to my listeners, was inclusive, and that also represented important elements around my values, my purpose, my vision, my mission of my company, to make sure that whatever whatever audience I was trying to serve was really putting the best foot forward, and that I could be as welcoming to different groups of people, but also inclusive to different perspectives, especially for my podcast. So I always really appreciate the time to connect with you and work with you on that. Lots of great
Thank,
feedback.
thank you so much. It's a pleasure to work with you.
And typically, who do you work with? Because I know that you've worked a lot with government agencies, but are there other specific, organizations or industries that you typically gravitate to?
I've done work with um, higher education, with National Bank work, and also I've done some work with like solopreneurs, coaches,
Mhm.
trainers, yoga teachers, artist coaches. And I've also done some work in the nonprofit sector, uh, primarily around Indigenous issues, around language revitalization, and around youth services.
And you've recently written, like you said, a couple of books. So can you
Yes,
tell us about those, and what should we look forward to learning more about them this year?
for sure. April 15th is the day that my book, Stay Woke, Not Broke, comes out. And it's about building an inclusive business and um, creating more inclusive communications and moderating your communities in a way that is more welcoming. So that one is coming out, yeah, April 15th, and September 28th, the Canadian Business Owner's Guide to Reconciliation is coming out. So that's for business owners who have been wondering what their role is in the reconciliation space, what they can do to get involved, and whether there's a place for them in terms of responsibility. So that's what that book is going to cover. So I'm
Amazing.
really excited.
And what prompted you to write the books? I mean, I know that, like you said, you're a prolific writer. So is there anything that you're like, hey, like this is my time to write a book? Because a lot of books have been coming out recently, especially I think with people maybe grounded a little bit more during the last couple of years. But what was the impetus for you?
Yeah, well, these books are actually book 4 and 5 for me since the beginning of the pandemic. And I decided to do Stay Woke because I took a group program that I delivered in the beginning of the pandemic,
Mhm.
and I wanted to put some of them in book, some of the content in book format so that it would be more accessible to more people, and share what I've learned about those practices since then.
Mhm.
And then also, in terms of the Canadian Business Owner's Guide to Reconciliation, what I found was back when the grave sites were confirmed in Kamloops, I heard from a lot of brands that they wanted to be able to make a statement. They wanted to talk about things. They
Mhm.
wanted to get involved and give back, but they didn't really know if it was their role or what would be meaningful and helpful. So the book was really just being able to provide a resource to help them through those times. And so I'm really looking forward to getting that out into the world also.
I can't wait to read them. I'm really looking forward to looking through it, because I know that the work that you've been doing inside Aligned AF and speaking to my clients about, small steps that small business owners can take. So, because I love the title, stay woke, not broke. Is that, yeah? But to put in some of the larger organizations, to put in transformational diversity, equity, inclusion programs can be costly, just like putting in a new product line or any other strategy in organizations. For small business owners, I think they might get a little bit intimidated by that and saying, oh, I don't know if I can actually do something. I don't know what it's going to take of me. What have you seen, I guess, over the last couple of years, especially with some of the societal impacts that the pandemic has had on many people around the globe, that organizations have done, or even small businesses have done, that you've really admired?
For me, what I found really inspiring, particularly in the beginning of the pandemic, was that small businesses in my area were very quick to reach out and help people who maybe didn't have people in their lives to source items that were difficult to find through supply chain shortages,
Right.
and to really innovate around what people needed in those moments.
Mm.
So I found that really inspiring. The move to more remote work certainly is can be very helpful for people with disabilities and being able to manage their environment in a way that makes sense for them, or people who have childcare responsibilities or different family statuses where being able to work from home can be very conducive, and being able to cut out that commute time and spend more time, maybe save some money on childcare, but also getting to spend that time with your family during difficult times is really important to keep that connection going when other connections are more limited.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And then now that we're sort of going through this transition or migration of like going maybe from home back into work, and companies are like, I see, they're kind of tiptoeing very gently about like, well, what does that look like? Is it 2 days a week? Hoteling concepts where it's like people get to work in different desk stations, or maybe there aren't really, because we've collapsed some of the desks. I've heard that from some colleagues where they've gotten rid of desks completely and they're just taking their office space. They've either reduced it, or whatever's left of it, they've moved into more sort of general meeting places where employees can come in and work collaboratively together in projects, but then say work from home when they have to do individual work. What's some of the things that you're seeing that are working effectively, or caution points for organizations as they're making those decisions?
I think it's really important to consider when you're making a decision about moving from dedicated desks to a hoteling situation is the needs of your disabled employees. Is their adaptive equipment something that they're going to have to haul from home or to the office if they don't have a dedicated space?
Right.
Are there ergonomic factors with generic hoteling spaces versus spaces that are designed for the need of the employee? And keeping in mind, risk of injury from repetitive strain and all of those things of trying to work in a space that wasn't necessarily set up for you. So I think that's really important. And it's also really important to have curious conversations with your staff if there's reluctance or concerns around returning, and looking at like if someone's joined your team over the pandemic and remote work was something that was useful to them for any number of the reasons that we discussed, like what are some of the barriers that they might be experiencing, being mindful that there may be additional costs associated, and really looking at what your strategy is going to be to retain talent that you've recruited as you make whatever transition that your organization decides to do, and really think through the best and most thoughtful way to share that information and to consult about it.
I love the point about curious conversations, right? If you go in there with that agenda and trying to convince somebody versus like, yeah, let's actually talk to our employees, see what they need. And this is where I think a lot of organizations, will be a bit of the challenge, is they're not necessarily designed or set up to think individually for employee needs. They look at the masses, right? And
Mhm.
have we equipped leaders to be able to facilitate those conversations from an open mind perspective? And then what do we do with now like 138 different requests versus maybe we had just sort of decided that there was like three things that we were going to do for our employees, right? So, but I think like your point is listen, evaluate, see what you can do. Maybe you can't accommodate every single thing, but try your best, make those efforts, see what you can do sort of first, second, third. Maybe by the end of the process, you've accommodated all of their requests. But I think the key thing is acknowledging, right? So,
Absolutely. And really checking assumptions around, why people might be reluctant, in terms of, messaging that, people just really like hanging out in their sweatpants and, you know, but really thinking about like there might be some real like, financial, medical, and family reasons why this was a good fit for people.
right.
And to not just feel like people just don't want to work and they don't want to be supervised,
Yeah.
really like checking those biases and getting down to like, what does it really mean for my staff to be going through this change?
Yeah. Well, speaking of the sweatpants, I totally am all for it because I've like saved a ton of money not having to worry about, oh, do I need a new blazer? Do I need to show up differently? It's like just, stock the
Well,
shop, right?
and that, I mean, that's the other piece is that if you want to recruit diverse talent,
Mhm.
you have to look at like, are you open to people from different socioeconomic backgrounds?
Yeah.
And is an office dress code or way of showing up something that's going to be that has been keeping folks out of your organization,
Right.
and now through the pandemic with a different barrier to entry, we've got an opportunity there for people to be able to show up where they might not have felt prepared to just yet.
Well, I think we've seen that a lot, even with people being able to maybe move out of urban centers into more, affordable housing places and see their salary, value stretch more, right? It's like I might still be paid the same amount, but now my dollar goes farther because I'm not putting like half or more of my paycheck into paying a mortgage that I'll never be able to pay off. And feeling then that resentment or disengagement around the value of their pay for the work that they're doing. So I think people are also seeing that value. So, I mean, I think that's another thing for our organizations to consider is that especially with this great resignation that's happening, you hear about it. People are leaving maybe for another $3,000-$5,000, but if it means that they could work from home and not have to worry about commuting in every day, saving money in commuting dollars, living in a more affordable place versus downtown, close to the office locations, maybe they might not leave. So,
Well, and there's also benefits. I mean, we talk about diversity from, gender perspective or racial perspective or ability, but having geographic diversity is also really helpful in being able to solve problems because you get to look at things from different perspectives. If you have a whole bunch of people who live in a city who are solving a problem, they may not be aware of the challenges on implementation in a more rural community or
right.
what that might or how that might be received or perceived. So there are benefits to different perspectives and lived experiences that you can access more readily through remote work.
Yeah, I love that, especially if your product or services is outside of that city in which you operate in or live in. Yeah, you want to understand what those other perspectives are. It also, I think, opens up a whole other field of talent. We've seen obviously organizations be responsive to global talent and operating in global sectors before. Like that's not new. That's been happening over the last like 10, 15 years. But I think it's even opened up more. So that's also going to bring a whole new bunch of challenges maybe into your organization. Is again, maybe you've had most of your employees from one demo or like you said, geographic area, but now you've got other countries, cultures, languages that you may need to be in response to. So how does that, impact some of your diversity, equity, inclusion strategies?
For
So,
sure. Yeah, it's definitely important to think about those cross-cultural communications pieces and also um, the culture and traditions of the places that you're recruiting from and being aware of,
mhm.
other countries' holidays and observances and things that may have an impact on how you do business.
Excellent. So Allison, you're also here today to share your three uniques.
Yes. I would say that I am empathetic
Mhm.
and a storyteller and that I can be funny.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I've seen that for sure. Where did the empathy come from, and how does that show up in your work, in your life?
For me, my mission as a writer when I share stories is to help people feel less alone. So that's about creating representation when I'm sharing the stories of Indigenous people in the workplace and redefining our mental map of what somebody in a certain role or experience might look like or what their life might be like, and really helping people feel like, you know what, that's possible for me too. And being able to share a story from a lived experience where if someone doesn't necessarily have the words to be able to describe what they're going for, being able to lend them mine can be helpful. And also from like a journalistic perspective, I really like to approach a piece from a place of empathy because I really want to be able to help people feel felt when they share their stories and make sure that the audience really gets where they're coming from. And I think that's really important when we look at diversity and inclusion within business as well. I mean, I do things either through story or through strategy.
Mhm.
And really, when we have space for empathy, then we can create change within our space. But if we don't understand what it might feel like, it can be harder. It creates motivation because you're helping a person versus solving some big large problem. Like maybe you can't tear down the patriarchy today, but you can help Karen
Yeah,
figure out her work schedule so she can get her kids home from school on time or something.
yeah, I
So
love that.
really
I love that, and I
thinking
love how
small.
it weaves into your three uniques, and into your next one around storytelling. But where have you seen empathy not be received, I guess, because I feel like it's such a valuable tool in leadership and business, yet it's still relatively a new tool. So, I mean, I think that, like you mentioned, the patriarchy or hierarchy, it's like, does empathy exist in those type of models? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think that it's definitely it's about culture making and it's gradual. That's something that I hear Kelly Deals, who's a feminist business consultant in Chilliwack, talk about all the time in terms of the power of story to change culture. And I really respect and admire her thought leadership in that area. But I do think that it's something that we can chip away with at by sharing our stories and by being in relationship. And I mean, stereotypes and like programming we're not even aware of. That's the thing. We think about racism or, discrimination from a perspective like this is like a deliberate bad act,
Mm,
where we really need to be aware that like we all have unconscious biases that have been kind of programmed into us that we don't necessarily have an awareness of. So when you can demoralize it and just look at it as a problem to be solved or an area for growth and
right.
improvement, then you don't get stuck in those shame spirals. And it doesn't have to be something that uh, has to weigh on you so heavily. It can be an opportunity versus something to have a lot of guilt or shame about.
And I think you gave some earlier examples of where people could look at that from a business standpoint, like around things like dress code, attendance
Mhm.
policy. Like maybe in the beginning, when they originated, it was like to create some type of order, to create some type of conditioning in the organization, make things easier, so that managers don't have to spend too much time learning about how to make decisions. They can just refer to the dress code policy and say, you're in it, you're not. At the same time, though, it's a subtle form of discrimination, right? It could, like you've talked about, as far as social economic backgrounds of our people that we work with. Maybe they can't afford to comply with dress code every single day, or them wearing the same blazer every single day means that they're putting more of their paycheck into their housing or sending their kid to a really great school program versus putting it into their fashion budget. So, I think that that's where it's like we need to settle, there's the whole like tear down the like patriarchy, like you said, or it's like, hey, what are some subtle things that we can do that can make some significant shifts for people?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of reasons for developing policy. I think policy, like it's a system,
Hmm.
and when we create inclusive systems, then we can reduce the need for discretion that might be, applied unfairly towards groups that tend to be, over policed in their behaviors. But really building it in a place where people can show up as their full selves and still have a sense of belonging within the organization. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunities to reflect and create change over time that isn't necessarily going to be expensive, but could make a difference in the lives of our staff.
I love it. And so storytelling, your second unique. How does that show up? Well, we already know you're writing books, so that's one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that being able to use examples can really help contextualize people as they're looking at large concepts that seem really big, and being able to bring it down to a manageable, what does this look like on a day-to-day level? I mean, it's also a way that I integrate, my Indigenous heritage within the work that I do, because it is, a, a people of storytelling. So I really like that I get to integrate that into my work. And I think that people can connect with that. And I just love that I get to share the stories of amazing people and everyday people, and help people understand that, we all want things. We want our life to be better. We want our families to be okay. We want to be able to take care of ourselves. We want to be able to contribute to the world around us. We all have these things that we want to do, and we're just all coming from different places.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was there someone early in your life that inspired you to share your stories and be the storyteller for others?
My grandma, she used to bring me over to her neighbor's house with my little notebook of stories and poems, and I would do impromptu readings for Hannah, who lived next door, and my other grandmother as well. She always wanted to know what I've been working on, and was always this weird little kid with a notebook. But yeah, so I think that's something that's been a thing for a long time. And I taught myself to read very young, so I was always reading. So stories really shaped my life. And because we moved every year, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to kind of make and keep friends. But
Mm-hmm.
books was always something I could take with me wherever we were.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. And your third unique, being funny or adding humor. How did you?
I think that when we can approach difficult topics
Mm-hmm.
with or awkward conversations with humor, it can make it a little bit less intimidating,
Mm-hmm.
right? And being able to bring it down to a human level.
Right.
And I mean, certainly just thinking about the last couple of years, there's been like a lot of like seriously weird stuff that's happened.
Yeah.
And, it's been kind of like laugh or cry or both if you're good at multitasking. But
Mm-hmm.
like, it's really, I think having a sense of humor can be a protective factor in being able to manage change and being able to um, be flexible, and roll with things. But also at the root of humor is noticing things. And so when we cultivate that ability to be humorous, we're cultivating our ability to notice the world around us and the people in it,
Mm-hmm.
and to see commonalities and find those human experiences. And I think that's really central to the work of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Like when I think of specific comedians, they'll bring up things. You'll be like, "Oh yeah, like why is it that we do that? And why is it that we always walk around something like that?" And because human beings, like we're perplexing people, right? And again, when we talk about big topics like racism or discrimination, the average person I know would say, "Oh, I know I'm not a racist. I know I'm not discriminatory." But you said we have biases. And those
Yep.
biases sometimes be just things that we just continually do, patterns, ways of being that, we were raised a certain way, we went to school a certain way, and we just continue to do that. But we can change those patterns because we learned those patterns at some point in our life. And, if we decide to make a conscious decision that they're not serving us anymore or serving our neighbor anymore, we can make that conscious decision to change it. But I love how you bring in humor just to kind of point out sometimes the obvious things that we might be missing.
Oh, absolutely. I think about local Indigenous comedian Sasha Mark and the way he uses humor to talk about Indigenous experiences and things that have happened in his life. And I mean, it's it's funny because he is allowing us to laugh about it. It
Hmm.
wouldn't be, these aren't necessarily stories that you would hear and laugh at,
Hmm.
but the way things are contextualized, it creates a space for learning that also is enjoyable and accessible. And you don't notice so much that you're learning things because you're having a good time. And I mean, I think I can't think of very many kind of e-learning courses I've done in like a corporate context where I've been like, that was the most fun ever, hilarious, right? But doing that personal development piece of learning through the humor of other people and their cultures can be really important, an
Yeah.
interesting way to pick things up and get a different perspective.
Yeah. I have to say too, like, I mean, working with you, and because that's one of the things that I love when you've come in and we've done a session before, and then also talking to the people, the folks, the leaders inside Aligned AF, where it's like you'll bring up something and it'll be a really serious topic, and then you'll add some like just like, this is perplexing. Why we do this? Why aren't we changing it? And people are like, oh yeah. So it does make it more approachable, and it gets people thinking that there's other areas in their life or their workplaces or their relationships with people that they could make a change to. And it makes it doesn't seem as like daunting a task is what I think, is that we see, oh, you know what, at the end of the day, we're fundamentally humans, we're flawed, we have biases. Take a breath and figure out what you need to do to restore that relationship.
Absolutely. And just think about what are the situations where you learn the most. It's where you're comfortable.
Hmm.
And when you're able to laugh at somebody, then you're in a more comfortable space and able to receive your message. So I
Absolutely.
think it's also about just creating an ideal learning environment.
So, question for you: how has a mishap or a failure or a whoopsie impacted how you live your three uniques, or do the work that you do and the people that you work with every day?
Okay, so yesterday was wild. My partner drove his kids to school and he got a flat tire on the way to the school. And meanwhile, I was at home and there had been a storm and it knocked out our internet like 5 minutes after he left. And so I had all of these things that I had to do. And in our area, we only had like 1 to 2 bars of LTE. So my laptop was not hotspotting off of that. It was not cooperating. So I had all of these things to do and not a lot of technology on hand. But I mean, the way that I do my work is very relational, and being able to approach people and be like, hey, we need to shift this. We need to reimagine how we do this, getting creative about, okay, so we meant to have a Zoom, but we're going to get on the phone like people used to do. And, so
Yeah.
I think that it was really kind of a way I mean, approach with humor, share the story of what happened and draw on the empathy of like, we have all had those Mondays, right? Like we've all had a day where nothing went right. And
Absolutely. Yeah, this whole like drive for perfection versus, hey, this is real life, and again, we're flawed, we've got issues, and we've got to like navigate through it. So I love it. Thank you. And just like that flexibility. I mean, you are also a small business owner in yourself, right? So you work with other business owners that are sort of going through the same type of things in their life every day. So it also probably, that's that empathy coming through, right? The compassion that you have.
yeah, I think at this point of the pandemic, a lot of folks, are used to things maybe not going exactly as planned,
Right.
and, maybe my cat is going to wander past in the background, or, maybe the doorbell is going to ring because there's a package or something, or maybe the construction crew will show back up. But, right, like stuff happens. And so I think the way we're able to show up for each other in those times is really important. And that's what kind of creates that cohesion and the sense of belonging that we're looking for when we look at these big initiatives. It really comes down to how are we relating on a human level.
Yeah, just as you were talking about your cat, my dog just woke up from her nap, and when she wakes up from her nap, she's just like, "Play with me right now," and I'm like, "I'm in the middle of a podcast recording." Like, Just hold it for another 10 minutes, please. But yeah, it's just like, being able to navigate those things. Is there a habit or a practice you've adopted recently that's kind of helped you sort of navigate through your business? And also, when you're confronted, because I would imagine that the work that you do, although there are people and organizations that commission you to help them in their reconciliation journey or in putting inclusive practices in place, you still probably get exposed to some things that are not great, and seeing those things. Is there something that you do, like a habit or a ritual, that just like helps keep you grounded and keeps you in the space of serving and doing the great work that you do?
I try to be intentional about creating opportunities for connection with the people in my world,
Mhm.
and also giving grace. And something I'm learning to do more is leaving more time after to process things and building in those buffers, because these can be very human interactions, and with lots of feelings, and I mean, even things that are not intended to be emotionally deep, in light of things happening in the world, the way we do those might have to shift, right? Like, I'm thinking about when the Pope apologized last week, and
Right.
there's a lot of things about my day that shifted, and the way I approached people
Mhm.
and how I prioritized things, in recognition of the fact that people were sitting with different feelings, and trying to leave space for my own feelings in that too,
Right.
right? It's been so, yeah, really just giving a lot more space around things, and not scheduling so tightly, and taking the time to be able to, move my body, to create relaxation rituals, and to build in accountability, to keep me moving when it feels like a lot. So that's been really helpful for me.
Thank you, Allison. Thanks for coming on today and sharing your three uniques with us.
Thanks for having me.
And where can we find? I think you may have mentioned it before, but you've got one book coming out. The Stay Woke, Not Broke book is coming out on April 15th. And then your other book that's going to be coming out in September, all around Canadian business owners and their reconciliation strategies. Where can we find those books?
So right now, you can pre-order Stay Woke Not Broke from anywhere you buy books. Like, independent bookstores can order it in. You can get it on Amazon. It's in store, or actually a little bit early right now, at some Black Bond and Book Warehouse and things like that. I'm not sure where the Canadian Business Owners Guide to Reconciliation will be distributed, but it will for sure be on Amazon, and through my publisher, Self Counsel Press. They also have my titles and many other really helpful resources for business owners on their website.
Great. And we can find you at AlisonTedford.com.
Yes,
Okay, great. And on Instagram, Alison Tedford.
yes,
All
and
right. Yeah.
Facebook also.
And Facebook too, right? Well, Alison, again, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much for sharing your three uniques with us. Stay well, stay healthy.
Thank you so much.
And for everyone tuning in today, again, thanks for listening to us on Three Uniques. As I always say at the end of every podcast, there's 7.8 billion people on this planet. Get out there and share your three uniques. Take care, everyone.